with the people that we love most, we don't always get the messages across that we want to get them. But it becomes even more complicated when we start thinking about, in a business context, the requirements for an idea to stick, in that it's going to be understood when people hear it, that it's going to persist over time, and it's going to change something about how they think or how they act. And so if you look for a moment at the complications that we have, if you're the director of sales for your organization, it's rarely the case that the critical customer decision is going to be made the moment that the PowerPoint presentation is done, the moment that the sales call is done. And so in order for your decision, your information to make a decision, change that decision, you've got to be in a position to have your message stick with that person a week later, a month later, at the critical time when they think, that's the time I need to schedule my event at Embassy Suites. If you're the general manager of your hotel, the critical customer moment is never going to happen when you're in the room, when you're looking over that person's shoulder. And so in order to make a message stick about the cultural change that you're trying to create at your hotel, that message better persist over time. And there's an even higher standard in that in order for your ideas to make a difference, they have to cross boundaries. There are lots of important ideas that you have and you talk about within the context of your top leadership team, but they have to cross the boundaries to the people at the front line of your hotel that are delivering the service. And there's an even bigger boundary that your ideas have to cross between all of you inside of your hotels and the customers or clients on the outside. Now, especially in a recession environment, I know that that can be a depressing thought, but I'm not here to depress you. And so I want to convince you that it is possible to make your ideas stick, to make your ideas make a difference, to have them persist over time. And let's start with some ideas, some really kind of quirky, interesting ideas that have stuck. Here's one. How many of you have heard this idea? You only use 10% of your brain. Go ahead and raise your hand. Let's take a market share. Wow. That looks like it has a market share north of 95% in this very distinguished audience. And this is a completely bogus, ludicrous idea, right? If this were true, it would certainly take the fear out of brain injury. You could lose a whole hemisphere and not disturb your ability to do Sudoku on the plane going home. Here's another idea. I just ran across this one recently. This is a room key card, and I understand that you guys deal with a rumor, a false rumor about the information that is encoded on this. Have you guys run into that? Oh, some of you have. So according to this rumor, you encode my credit card information on the back of this room key. Why do you do that? I mean, this is important. I've also heard variations of the rumor that you encode my Facebook password on the back of this key card. Right? Now that's a completely ludicrous idea, but it leads to some changes in behavior on the part of your customers. You get fewer of these things back than you would have normally because people are trying to protect their credit card information. Here's the third that I want to present to you of an idea that is stuck, and you want to talk about an idea that changes behavior. This is one that changes behavior. Here it is. How many of you have heard a story about a guy traveling on business, accepts a drink from an attractive stranger, and winds up in a bathtub full of ice? Go ahead and raise your hand on that. It looks like that one has a smaller market share, about 30% in this audience, so I'm going to tell it to the rest of you that haven't heard it. If you were on a college campus, by the way, the market share of this idea would be north of 80%. All right? So here's the story. Man traveling on business walks into a hotel bar one night, accepts a drink from an attractive stranger. The next thing he remembers, he wakes up. He's disoriented, he's groggy, he's in pain. He's in a bathtub full of ice, and his body's shivering. And as his eyes come into focus, it's a little bit blurry, but his eyes come into focus, and there's a note on the front of the bathtub saying, "Call 911." And there beside the bathtub is his cell phone, and so he reaches over and grabs the cell phone, holds it to his ear, dials 911, and starts describing his situation to the operator, who is weirdly unfazed by this strange turn of events. The operator says, "Sir, I want you to reach back behind your back and see if there's a tube protruding from your lower back." So the guy reaches back gingerly and confirms that, yes, sure enough, there is a tube protruding from his lower back. The operator says, "Sir, I'm sorry to say this, but there's a gang of organ thieves that has been operating in our city, and one of your kidneys has been harvested. But don't worry, the paramedics are on their way." Now, that is an utterly terrifying story. And it's completely untrue. Nobody has ever woken up in a bathtub full of ice with one of their kidneys missing. But talk about an idea that would change your behavior, right? Think of the last memo that you read at work. Think of the last news story that you saw in the media about a political program. Now, those ideas are pretty unlikely to change your behavior 6 months from now. But I guarantee you that after hearing that story one time, if 6 months from now a stranger at a bar sends you a drink, you're going to think twice. And it's especially ironic that that story is rampant on college campuses these days, because I've heard versions of that story, and talk about something that crosses barriers. I've heard versions of the story in the United States, and from college students in Singapore, and from college students in France. And that's a tragedy, because if there's one time in your life when you should be accepting drinks from attractive strangers, it's when you're in college. That's a good thing when it happens. It never happened to me, but it would have been a good thing if it had. All right? Now, I start with these silly, dumb, bogus ideas because I want to point out that there are ideas that circulate around in the natural environment that don't have a lot of the advantages that your ideas have. So I'm going to show you some of the advantages of your ideas. Urban legends don't have advertising programs of any kind. There's no ad money behind the kidney theft urban legend. They don't have newsletters. They don't have budgets. And they don't have make a difference videos, which by the way is great. That's some of the best training material that I've seen. But they don't have videos. They don't have letters from the general manager. Your ideas start out with an advantage in your environment. But if we think about all of the good ideas that we have in the world, all of the good ideas that we have in politics floating around, all of the good ideas that are floating around in your organization, those ideas don't always become sticky ideas. So what would a good sticky idea about a true and noble and useful idea look like? Well, John F. Kennedy in 1961 proposed that our nation put a man on the moon and return him safely within the course of the decade. Now that was a sticky idea. Talk about something that crosses boundaries. That organized the efforts of thousands of people across dozens of organizations, public and private, for the better course of a decade. I grew up in Houston, Texas. My father worked for IBM. He did some of the programming on the original Gemini missions. My dad didn't think of himself as working for IBM. He thought of himself as helping put a man on the moon. And even better, there was an accountant who lived down the street from us. He worked for Rockwell International. They made parts of the Saturn V rocket bodies. And the accountant thought of himself as helping put a man on the moon. Now folks, when you get the accountants with your messages, you know you're on to something. That's remarkable. And if you think about that idea, that was a true and noble and useful idea, like the kinds that you guys deal with on a day-to-day basis. And that idea, John F. Kennedy made his idea stick. And what I found in doing the research for the book Made to Stick, I worked with my brother Dan. He's 10 years younger, so it was a bit of a family bonding experience. And we looked at sticky ideas from all kinds of domains of life, ranging from urban legends like the kidney theft legend, to corporate strategies that affect the behavior of frontline employees, to marketing campaigns that work, to public health messages that convince junior high kids not to start smoking. And what we kept seeing were the same traits coming up over and over again. And we wrote about those in our book Made to Stick. And I put a picture up there of the cover of our book because Dan and I are insanely proud of the duct tape on the cover of our book. We had long arguments with our publishing house because they wanted to put Scotch tape or Post-it notes. They kept coming up with the cover designs with those things. And we had to sit them down at one point and explain, look, Post-it notes are designed not to stick. That's the opposite of the kind of ideas that we want. And so what we found in Made to Stick is that we found 6 traits of sticky ideas. They're simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and many come in the form of stories. And the Scrabble players will note that there's an acronym. It's success without the final S. So those 6 traits kept coming up over and over again. And let's talk through those briefly in the context of a man on the moon in the decade to give you a sense of what they're like. That was a simple idea. I could understand it as a kid growing up in Houston, Texas. It was an unexpected idea. Unexpected ideas get your attention, even in a crowded environment. And John F. Kennedy's idea was unexpected enough that it seemed like science fiction at the time. I mean, the moon is a long way up. The air is thin. How are you going to put a man on the moon? And that rivets your attention to an idea. It was a concrete idea. Concrete ideas are things that you can picture in your mind, that produce a visual. And John F. Kennedy's idea, everyone watching the space program, everyone involved in the space program could picture success in exactly the same way. And that's a challenge for all of us because we have lots of great ideas in our organizations. But it's not always easy to say that people would picture success in exactly the same way. It was a credible idea. Put the success back up for a second. Credible idea coming out of the mouth of a charismatic young president who was willing to put resources behind it. It was an emotional idea. It appealed to our desire to reach the next frontier. It appealed to our desire to beat the Soviet Union at the space race. And it was a story in miniature. It was a story about accepting a challenge, taking a journey, and returning from it. So John F. Kennedy's idea scores pretty much 6 out of 6 on the success framework. And I don't want to argue that your idea has to score 6 out of 6. But I do want to suggest that your ideas are going to be more successful if you have 4 of these properties than if you have 2 of these properties. If you have 2 of these properties than if you have 0 of them. So the process of making your messages to your employees, to your customers, to the people that you're calling on in a sales call, the process of making your ideas sticky ideas is a process of building these ideas, these traits into your idea. And so let's start with the hardest one, simplicity. There's a famous trial lawyer that's done something unusual for all of us in a business context. He's collected data about every message that he's ever put out into the world. So after every trial, he sends an associate to contact as many jurors as possible. And the research associate interviews the juror and says, of all the arguments, of all the facts that were presented in the courtroom, which one influenced your decisions? What affected the jury's deliberations when you went back to the jury room? And what this lawyer has found, he says, if I walk into the courtroom and I have 10 good arguments, even if every one of them individually is a great blockbuster argument, by the time the jurors get back to the jury room, they don't remember anything. So he says something, I think this is really important. He says, if you say 10 things, you say nothing. Now, that's a sobering message because we have way more than 10 things that we want to say about the current economic climate and how we ought to all be acting. We have way more than 10 things that we want to say about our brand and what makes us a great hotel. But simplicity is about a process of prioritizing. And simplicity is about being as effective as you can be and taking out the second and the third most important things and making sure you don't say them until you say the first most important thing. Now, how would you take a complex idea and get it across fairly simply? Well, here we can take advice from Hollywood movie producers because they have something that they call high concept pitches. And very often, $100 million movies are pitched and produced based on a very simple core idea that captures the essence of a movie. Now, all of you have a lot of experience with Hollywood, so I'm going to give you a little pop quiz here. I'm going to give you a high concept pitch, and you're going to tell me what movie is associated with that high concept pitch. Are you ready? Here it is. Die Hard on a Bus. Speed. Pretty good. Starring Keanu Reeves. All right. You're doing the movie Die Hard on a Bus. That's a fairly simple, boiled down, condensed message. But I want to suggest that the test of a good, simple idea is, can you make decisions based on that idea? Can you take the right action? So here's a decision you might have to make. The finance person from the studio comes to you and says, we're in an economic downturn. We've got to make some cutbacks. I wanted to talk to you about this line item for special effects. That's a really large line item. Can we cut down the special effects budget for Speed? And you say, no, we're doing Die Hard on a Bus. What would Die Hard be without explosions, things blowing up, right? Let's talk catering. Catering we can talk about. Here's a second decision that you might want to make. Marketing person comes through you and says, we have 2 release dates available for Speed. One is a summer release date, and the other is this nice holiday season, December, Christmas, Hanukkah kind of release date. Which do you choose? Summer. Your marketing decision is made for you, right? This is a summer movie. You want the kids to be out from school. It's not a warm family holiday season kind of thing, right? Final decision is an HR decision because HR decisions are always the toughest. Your HR person comes to you and their head's hanging down. They say, I'm sorry, I just got off the phone with Bruce Willis's agent and Bruce is not available to do the movie. And you commiserate for a few seconds, and then your HR person says, but I think I can get Keanu Reeves. And you say, I hear some yeses. They tend to be higher pitched yeses than the no's in the crowd. And there, we could have an interesting discussion. We could have an interesting debate about whether Keanu Reeves is the right leading man for Die Hard on a Bus. And I think on the positive side, Keanu Reeves is a good-looking guy. I mean, if he bulked up a little bit, did some weightlifting, he might be a good leading man. But the problem is, every time he opens his mouth, he sounds like Surfer Dude, California, which is not exactly the action hero thing. And I think this is actually how the discussion went for Die Hard on the Bus, because what they ended up doing is they ended up hiring Keanu Reeves and writing out all of his speaking lines, so he could just look good on screen and active and manly, right? But he didn't have to talk during the movie. So that's the advantage of a high concept pitch, and that's the advantage of the right kind of simple ideas. You can't always be in the room when your customer's making the decision, when your employees are making the decision. But if you have the right simple message, they ought to be able to make the decision for you. Here, let me give you a couple of other examples of high concept pitches just to show that this is not just a Hollywood thing. Here's a high concept pitch for a business: Blockbuster by mail without late fees. Netflix, right? As a customer, do you want to be a part of that? Blockbuster I always liked. By mail sounds more convenient, and I hate the late fees in Blockbuster. That's a great idea for a business. Final example, and this is from tourism. This is the flag of Quebec City in Canada. And they've recently had a little high concept pitch about why you might want to visit Quebec City in Canada. And here it is. We're like France without the attitude. That's the advantage of a high concept pitch. Your role, if you want to get your ideas to stick, is to find the core essence, find the simple message, find your high concept. Second principle of sticky ideas is that they get our attention. They're unexpected. Unexpected ideas surprise us enough that it stops us in our tracks and makes us pay attention to an unexpected idea. You only use 10% of your brain. I can't think of any reason that idea circulates. And by the way, folklorists have traced that idea as far back as a discussion of the 1924 World's Fair. That's an idea that has been circulating for over 80 years without advertising dollars, just because it's surprising. Like, wow, I thought the brain was more important than that. Wow, if I could use 13%, that would be a 30% improvement, all right? So there's an idea that circulates because of surprise. Now, how do you get your ideas to be surprising? Well, there's a simple recipe. To get somebody's attention, to surprise somebody, all you have to do is to break a pattern. Let me give you an example. We all have patterns in our mind for all kinds of things, what hotel stays ought to be like. Or we even have patterns for what a diet should be. And so if I tell you a friend of mine is on a diet, what is my friend eating? Lettuce, salads. I mean, here's your picture of my friend's diet, right? Isn't that what's in your mind? And so it's lettuce, salads, carrots, unwashed, maybe so that you get a few nutrients in there. And then I say, no, my friend's not on that diet. My friend's on that diet. Do you know that diet? Atkins diet. There was a Dr. Atkins. There is an Atkins Family Foundation. But the amazing thing about the Atkins Family Foundation is they never had to spend money on advertising, because word of their diet circulated like an urban legend. And I guarantee you, if you've heard of the Atkins diet, the first time you heard of it, you heard, it's like, Cousin Bob lost 30 pounds eating bunless bacon cheeseburgers. Isn't that amazing? It blows every concept that you ever had. It blows the pattern that was in your mind about a diet. And that's what made it an effective idea. Now, let me show you another domain. And a lot of you are in crowded markets, but let me show you a market that's even more crowded than yours. I don't know how many hotels there are in your town, but let me guarantee you that there are many more places that sell hamburgers in your town. And so how would you stand out in the hamburger market? Well, again, let's try to break a pattern. And there's a place that the first time I saw it on YouTube from a Japanese film crew that had visited this place in Tempe, Arizona, and it's called the Heart Attack Grill. Now, if there's one pattern that comes to your mind when you think about hamburgers, it's kind of all American food, but it's not necessarily nutritious, right? And we're concerned more about nutrition these days in our diets. And here is an organization that is gleefully violating the pattern of trying to become more health conscious, offering the grilled chicken sandwiches and that kind of stuff. Here's what you can order if you go to the Heart Attack Grill: a triple bypass burger. All right, that's one of the menu items that you might enjoy. Let me show you a picture of the triple bypass burger. Oh yeah, so that is 1.5 pounds of meat. There is cheddar cheese on there. For the vegetarians in the crowd, there are tomatoes and onions, right? And in real life, this is what actually, this guy's got a quadruple bypass burger I'm about to show you. This is a picture of a happy, satisfied customer. Now, That's an unexpected story, right? You can imagine if you go to the Heart Attack Grill, you're going to talk about that recently. And I want to highlight some things about this picture. The first is that is a ludicrous amount of food. I watched the Planet Earth channel and the Discovery Channel, and I'm pretty sure that that would last a python for about a month, right? Second thing I want to highlight is the fries. There's some very special fries that you can get at the Heart Attack Grill. They're called flatliner fries. They are fried in pure pork lard. And if you want the upgrade option, you can get your flatliner fries with brown gravy and chunks of mozzarella cheese. Right. Third thing I want to highlight is that the waitresses are dressed up as nurses to take care of you in the Heart Attack Grill. Next question is, how do you get to your car after you finish your triple bypass burger? And the answer is your waitress wheels you out in a special wheelchair that they keep. The final thing, and I say this to the end, I've actually covered up the label of this drink. This guy is drinking Diet Coke. Which is a case of like, why bother? But luckily, for brand consistency reason, this is a case of bring your own beverage because the Heart Attack Grill does not sell diet beverages, all right? Now, isn't that a remarkable story? This is a hamburger place in Tempe, Arizona that gets international attention because they have realized that there is a pattern in the world that we have of hamburger restaurants, and they have gleefully violated it. Now, how would that apply to you? How do you stand out in your crowded market? Well, I think you're doing, just in terms of your fundamental brand essence, you're doing a lot of things right from the start. All sweets! I mean, isn't that a remarkable thing? For the same price, I can have a sweet. And here's my favorite, free breakfast. My family stays at Embassy Suites a lot. We spent a really wonderful vacation week in Portland at your Embassy Suites there. And my daughter, who's now 6 years old, every time we go to a hotel, which unfortunately, is not always Embassy Suites, but sometimes we're staying in a town where we can't have one, and she can't wait. She bounds out of bed in the morning and says, let's go down to the breakfast buffet. And we have to break the news to her that is not common in every hotel, right? And so that's remarkable. What you are doing at the core of your brand essence is already unexpected enough that that's serving you very well in your marketplace. But here are some things that you may not have thought of, and that might not cost that much money, but would make you stand out as an experienced business traveler. Let me tell you a couple of hints that I have. What if in every Embassy Suites there was a garage wall? Because one of the things that I really miss about traveling is having duct tape and WD-40 and needle nose pliers. Because there's always something squeaking on your wheels of your luggage that you need to WD-40, and there's always something that breaks that you need duct tape for, and there's always a broken zipper, or your daughter's necklace comes apart and you really need those needle nose pliers. Wouldn't it be nice if you just had that as standard equipment in an Embassy Suites? Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to talk about? I just walked in and got the WD-40 and fixed it up and rolled out, right? Here's another one, the kids' treat bowl. My daughters love going to the dentist because they get Dora the Explorer stickers, right? Now, I'm a dad and I travel a lot, and it's always good having those reunions with the kids when you come back home from a trip. But I don't always have time to stop by the store and bring a treat at home. What if you just had the dentist treat bowl, and as a parent, as a mom or a dad, I could reach in and grab something and bring it back to give my kid a treat at the end, right? I would be the best parent ever if I had access to the dentist treat bowl on every business trip. You can do that for your customers, and it wouldn't cost a lot of money, but it would be something that sets you apart. It's something that sets you apart at the quality and the level of service that you enjoy. So here's the challenge for you. I don't care how you do it, but understand the pattern in your industry and find a way to break that pattern. That's what's going to make your message stand out. That's what's going to be unexpected. Third principle. Sticky ideas are concrete. And what I mean there is that they call up a picture in your mind. If there's a picture in your mind, it's concrete. If it makes you hear something, if it makes you feel something, that idea is concrete. It's sensory, it's tangible. And urban legends have that property. That's why they circulate on their own. I still can't tell that kidney theft urban legend without my body wanting to start to shiver because of that bathtub full of ice, right? And when your body's involved in it, you know it's a concrete idea. But unfortunately, most of our ideas in business are anything other than concrete. We talk in abstractions. Here's a business buzzword generator I pulled off the internet. And what you're supposed to do is select a word from each column to come up with your very own business buzzword. Let's do it together here. Top of column 1, strategic. Bottom of column 2, empowering. top of column 3, vision. A strategic, empowering vision. We need one of those for our organization, right? Let's do another one. Reciprocal, first column. Cost base, second column. Re-engineering, column 3. Especially in a time of economic crisis, we need to do some of that reciprocal cost-based re-engineering. That's how we talk in business, right? And that's a tragedy, because there is not a single image that came to your mind when I put together those buzzwords. There is not a single feeling that you had when I put together those buzzwords. Now, what I want to show you is that we're not the only people that have this problem. In medicine, if you've ever talked to a doctor, you know that they have their own abstractions. Here's my favorite from medicine. Idiopathic cardiomyopathy. Cardiomyopathy means there's something wrong with your heart. Idiopathic means we have no idea why yours isn't working, right? I could have just said that, right? So every profession, every field has their own abstractions, and the problem with abstractions is we're trying to get people to act differently. We're trying to get our clients to act differently. We're trying to get our employees to act differently. And yet we're talking to them in this abstract, professional, business kind of jargon, and we're not always connecting. Let me show you the power of concreteness to lead to action. And I'm going to tell you about a study that was done at Stanford University. And this study pits a concrete message against a serious targeting manipulation. Because we talk about targeting a lot. We talk about targeting our customers. We talk about selecting the right employees that are going to live up to the brand promise of our hotels, right? And so what they did in this situation is their targeting manipulation was they asked a bunch of college students to nominate the most kind and the least kind person in their dorm. Now, dorms have 60 to 150 people, and so people are picking out the single most generous, most wonderful, give you the shirt off their back person out of 60 to 150 college students, because they all know each other very well. They go to parties together, they study together, they eat together. The single most kind person. And they also had them pick out the single least kind person, the most curmudgeonly, most selfish, least pro-social, future investment banker person in the crowd, right? And so we've got the most kind and the least kind person. And then we're going to send the most kind or the least kind person a letter. And there are two different forms of the letter. And it's about a food drive. We're raising canned food for people that don't have enough to eat. And in one case, and I'm calling this the abstract letter, but it's already way more concrete than a lot of the instructions that we give our employees in our hotels. But they say in the abstract letter, we're having a canned food drive, bring canned food from Monday to Friday next week in the central plaza of campus. It's a small plaza, everybody knows where it is. But there's another letter, and people are randomly assigned to either the abstract letter or the concrete letter. And the concrete letter is just a tad more concrete. It says, bring beans. I want you to think about your schedule for next week. Think about a time where you're going to be close to Tressiter Plaza, and pick a time that you're going to be close by to bring your can of beans. So like 3 o'clock on Wednesday when I get out of calculus class and I go get my mail, that's when I'm going to do it. So I picked a time. And then finally, they give a map of the campus plaza, and they circle the specific location of the food collection booth. It's right over by the post office. And so I've got a mental image of exactly where it is in the campus plaza. Now, the whole campus plaza you could walk around in 2 minutes. It's not hard to find. But now I've got an image in my mind of what's going on. Now what happens is we're going to go in and see how the most kind and the least kind people respond first to the abstract appeal. And here's the answer. We're not doing too well at raising food. And people are basically right about their fellow students. The most kind people, 8% of them show up with a can of food, and 0% of the least kind. But that's nothing to write home about, right? And what's extraordinary already is we've got a really strong targeting manipulation. The single most kind, the single least kind, but it's not seeming to drive that much change in behavior. Now, what happens with the concrete letter? Response rates go up, but note that they go up for everyone. And here's the most remarkable thing, I think, in the graph. Right? 25% of the least kind, most selfish, least pro-social people in the dorm show up if you give them a really concrete picture of what's going on, if you give them the map to the event, if you tell them to bring a can of beans. Right? And in fact, you're 3 times better off with the most selfish person in the dorm than you are with a budding young Mother Teresa without a map. Right? Now that's a remarkable thing, because it says that concreteness really matters when it turns to getting people to act. And so I'm asking you, what's the map for your employees? I really enjoyed going through some of the materials that you guys have to give out to your employees. And The Deal is, I think, an incredibly well-written book. But here's a concern that came to my mind. Because one of the things that you say in The Deal is act intuitively. Is that concrete? It sounds abstract. It also sounds hard to do, right? Like act spontaneously. Do something now, right? How would I act intuitively? And here's the paradox. You know what you mean as general managers when you say act intuitively. But you're dealing with employees that don't have the wealth of experience that you have in the service business, in the hospitality business. And so it's really fundamentally important, if you want to change how people are acting, to make sure that that message is conveyed in as concrete a way as possible. Now, let me give you an example of what that might look like. Notice the smiles on the cover of this pamphlet. And that's one of the common recurring themes in service businesses, is that you should smile at people. I mean, it makes people feel good when you smile at them. Now, I think that's true on average. It's a good piece of advice on average. But I have a suspicion that smiles are not always the right responses. And maybe this is what you mean by acting intuitively. And so here's an experiment that you can run with your spouse sometime in the next few weeks. Pick a day on which your spouse has had an awful day. The traffic has been bad. There are deadlines at work that they're behind. The kids that they were trying to drop off were fighting all the way in. And they walk in at the end of the day and they are just beat. I mean, they look like they've been beaten with a stick up one side and down the other. And they walk in and they stare at you. And I want you, here's the experiment. I want you to look at them and smile and say, welcome. And I predict that they may throw something at you in that moment, right? So maybe what we mean when we talk about acting intuitively is when the traveler shows up and their flight's been delayed and they're here 3 hours after the meeting that they should have captured this afternoon, and they've got to get up very early in the morning for the next meeting. What that may mean is acting intuitively is empathizing rather than smiling, right? Now that's a shocking, unexpected statement for all of us who are managing in service businesses, because our tendency, and I think it's right 90% of the time, is to tell our people to smile. But if you want to be really concrete about acting intuitively, maybe you want to have a discussion with your people about when are the situations when it's wrong to smile. And I think I just described an experiment, and you can run it for yourself and verify, where that may be the wrong thing to do. Here's another one. Be gracious. Now that's an abstract statement, but I love down in the text below the next step in that. Imagine that you're the hostess of the party. Imagine that you're the father of the bride. Imagine your mom at Thanksgiving dinner. Now all of a sudden images are coming into my mind about what it means to be gracious. And so if you have a choice as a general manager of talking to your people, you're going to be tempted to lapse into code. And code is good as long as everybody understands exactly what the code means. But instead of just saying be gracious, say think mom at Thanksgiving party. Think the host at the party, right? That's the image that you have in mind. And you might want to even take it one step further. It's like, here's an even more concrete action step. It's like saying to the customer at the front desk, why don't you go grab a drink at our manager's reception that's going on right now? I'll bring your key over to you. And now all of a sudden, the employee, even the most curmudgeonly employee, and luckily your selection procedure is good enough to eliminate all those people in the dorms at Stanford University, the least kind people. You've taken care of that. You didn't hire them in the first place. But there's some range in service tendencies among your employee, and the advantage of being concrete is that you can take even the lowest person in your old organization, who's already pretty good, and by making their actions concrete, you can make sure that they take action in that critical situation. Your role, in order to change behavior, is to find the map. Sticky ideas are also emotional. And especially in a time of economic downturn, our tendency in getting emotion is to talk about the dangers that we all face. And there's a dumb phrase in the organizational change literature that says that in order to get employees to change, you've got to create a burning platform. If you want people to jump off of the platform, you set it on fire and then they'll jump off into the shark-infested waters below, right? But you got to set the platform on fire. Now there's a problem with that, is that negative emotions are good for short-term problems. If you've got a rock in your shoe, it hurts and you'll take it out. But in order to be in it for the long term, and all of you are in it for the long term, your brand is in it for the long term, You've got to create something different. And the problem with negative emotions, and here's the classic negative emotions from the public health domain, this is a smoker's lung. And there were a lot of campaigns in public health in the 1950s where they would hold up a blackened lung like that to smokers and say, if you smoke a pack a day, this is what your lungs look like in 10 years. Right? And there are two things that you can do if you're a smoker. One is you can stop smoking, but that's really hard. And the other thing that you can do is to stop watching my television commercials. Right? And that's what happened, is that if you ramp up the negative emotions too high, you get people shutting down and turning off. So why not think some other kinds of emotions? Why not think about hope and how to create hope in your messages? Let me give you an example of a hopeful message. This is a loyalty program for a local car wash. And some researchers went in and revamped their loyalty program and did an experiment with it. And so some people coming in for their car wash got a card that was good for a free car wash if you got 8 stamps on it. And it was blank, and all you had to do was collect 8 stamps in your on your card from car washes, and you'll earn the next car wash. The 9th car wash becomes free. And other people got a card that also had spaces for 8 stamps, but it was cleverly designed with 10 spaces, and the first 2 were filled in. It's the same situation. You've still got to buy 8 to get 1, right? But now all of a sudden there's a sense of hope. I'm making progress already. I already got 2 of my stamps filled in. Right? And note what's stunning. In the next 3 months, 19% of the customers of this car wash managed to get their 8 stamps in the 8-stamp passbook and collect their 9th stamp free. But look at that market share for the 2 stamps filled in. And you almost double the number of loyal customers that complete their 8 car washes in 3 months by giving them a head start. I don't know if you have loyalty programs here, but you ought to start stamping people's passbook, right? Making people feel like they're already on their way, that there's hope in the future. Let me give you a study that's remarkable, a study of hotel maids. And some researchers went in and they were interested in health behaviors and diet and exercise. And they went into a group of hotel maids and they asked them, do you exercise regularly? And 67% of maids said, I don't exercise regularly. And 33% said, I never exercise at all. Now, you all know what hotel maids do during the day. And if you fast forward through your film of a hotel maid's job, that is exercise. And so getting 33% of these folks to say, I never exercise at all, and you can understand what they're thinking, because they're thinking exercise is where you dress in spandex. And so we got women in spandex and sweaty men, you know, standing on treadmills and going nowhere. You know, that's our cultural picture of exercise, right? So you understand what they mean. But having 33% of maids say that I never get any exercise is like having 33% of late-night talk show hosts saying I never get to meet anyone interesting, right? It's like having Britney Spears say I never get any attention on the internet, right? It's just a ludicrous statement. And so what the researchers did is they went in and they gave some of the hotel maids 2 stamps on their postcard. And so one group, the health study said, some hotels, they went in and they just followed them. They worked as normal. They didn't say anything else. They took a bunch of measurements at the start and then they're going to take some at the end. But another group, they went in and they took a bunch of measurements at the start and they told them, you know, by the way, your work meets Center for Disease Control guidelines for an active lifestyle. I mean, changing bed linens is 40 calories an hour. Scrubbing down tiles is 60 calories an hour. You know, you have an incredibly active lifestyle. And now what happens a month later? The work as normal group basically stays stable in their weight. But the other group loses 1.8 pounds. Now that's a remarkable rate of weight loss. Even really serious diets, not the starvation diets, but really serious diets, you lose about 1 pound a week. So they're halfway on track to that just by making a mental shift and thinking about what they do on a daily basis as exercise. They got 2 stamps in their postcard. And if you want to be in the same mental condition as maids, then let me tell you about a study that I just read recently of exercise. And we all think that exercise, you got to get dressed up and you got to do it for 30 minutes at a time. This group of researchers had some people exercise for 30 minutes at a time, 3 times a week. And they had other people exercise 3 times a week, but you take the 30 minutes and you break it up into 6 5-minute chunks. And at the end of a few months, the people that are exercising 6 times a day for 5 minutes are doing just as well cardiovascularly. Everybody improves, but they're doing just as well as the 30-minute at a time people. Isn't that a freeing thought? I mean, ever since I heard about that study, I enjoy my walk-in from the parking lot. And in a university, I have to walk in really far from the parking lot. But now I'm doing aerobic exercise. I'm doing for my 5 minutes a day. This is one of my 5-minute increments. And all I got to do is 5 more, and I'm an exerciser. You know? Washing dishes in the evening becomes a competitive sport. You know, I'm washing, and I'm stacking in the dishwasher, and I'm washing. If you think about exercise as a series of activities, that's a different state. And it makes you feel more hopeful about the possibility. Now, you guys have messages that you're trying to get across about being gracious and engaging and caring. And the advantage that you have is you're already at the top of the J.D. Powers rankings. You're already industry leading. And so whatever you're trying to do, there's an incredibly helpful message is just do more of what you're doing. You've already got 6 stamps on your 10-stamp postcard. All right? That's a hopeful message. And in a time of economic downturn, that's a really important message to get across. Your role, if you want people to change, is to shrink that change. Make them feel like they're already there. Make them feel like they're already making progress. All right. Final principle is that sticky ideas come in the form of stories. We're still telling Aesop's fables 2,500 years after Aesop lived. The boy who cried wolf, the tortoise and the hare. If Aesop had given Aesop's helpful hints, you know, you remember that story about the fox who couldn't reach the grapes and therefore walks away and declares them sour. You know, that's where we get the phrase sour grapes. If Aesop had given Aesop's helpful hints, don't be a bitter jerk when you fail. Right? I'm not sure we'd still be talking about Aesop 2,500 years later, but he told stories. And those stories have lived on. They've crossed cultural boundaries. They're told in dozens of countries around the world. Now, if you look at serious professions that have activity that they have to conduct, firefighters, emergency room personnel, fighter pilots at the end of the day, what are they doing when they get together for a drink after the exercise? What are they doing when they get together in the locker room after a day of the emergency room? They're telling stories to each other. Did you see that patient? Did you hear about the patient that I had? And what's amazing about listening to stories is stories operate as little role plays for our brain. We're thinking as they tell us the story of their patient, it's like, would I have made the right call on that? Would I have ordered the right test? Would I have seen the right cue that they saw? And so here's the thing that I learned about stories, is that stories are not just entertainment, but in doing research from Made to Stick, what I learned is that stories are serious ways of exercising our abilities. And here's a study. It's a meta-analysis. It's a study of studies. And in this study of studies, they studied 35 studies with over 3,000 people with tasks ranging from trombone playing to welding to figure skating. And what they compared was one group of people that were really practicing the trombone or really practicing figure skating or really practicing welding, and another group of people that walked into a quiet room, folded their hands on their lap, and mentally practiced playing the trombone or practiced welding. And it may not surprise you that mental practice is not as good as real practice. But here's the remarkable thing. Mental practice is 2/3 as good as real practice. I find that stunning. Well, that's a study of studies with over 3,000 subjects in 35 different kinds of tasks. Mental practice is 2/3 as good as real practice. So the story in the emergency room, the story that the firefighter tells their colleagues about the situation, the tricky situation they had, it's not as good as being there, but it may be 2/3 as good. And so now think about the stories that you tell and how often and frequently you tell stories to your employees about what good customer service really looks like, what being gracious really looks like. Stories are flight simulators for our brains. And don't think about them as entertainment. Don't think about them as icing on the cake. Think about them as the action tendency. Think about them as the flight simulator that you're taking your employees through. Nordstrom is a great organization. It's known for outstanding customer service. And the problem with telling somebody that I stand for outstanding customer service is that the employees heard that all before. When they worked for Taco Bell in junior high school in the summer, they heard, we stand for outstanding customer service, right? But they really didn't mean the same kind of outstanding customer service. And so at Nordstrom, they tell stories to illustrate what outstanding really means. And they tell stories about, they call each other Nordies. And so they'll tell stories about the Nordie who ironed a shirt that a customer just bought because the customer needed it for a business meeting later on that day. They talk about a Nordie who cheerfully gift wrapped a package that a customer bought at Macy's. They tell a story about the Nordie who on a cold day went out and warmed up a customer's car so the customer could finish shopping. Now those are remarkable stories, and here's my favorite story. The Nordy who refunded money for a set of tire chains that a customer was dissatisfied by, even though Nordstrom's doesn't sell tire chains. Now if you were running Walmart, this would be a disastrous story to tell, right? That's not the competitive advantage of Walmart. Walmart's all about cheap, but Nordstrom's is about outstanding customer service. And what's remarkable about that story is it says that even if the problem wasn't ours, we don't even sell tire chains. That's what outstanding customer service means. You refund their money. And think about the action tendency that's associated with abstract phrases like outstanding customer service. Is that going to change anyone's action on the margin? Is that going to make your customer service representatives at the front line respond differently? Probably not. But now think about wrapping a package for Macy's. I can't get my packages wrapped at most stores even when I buy them there, much less buying a package from a competitor. Warming up their car. That's remarkable. We all think that customer service stops at the boundary of our store, of our retail establishment. Customer service stops when the person drives away in the car in the front of the hotel. But at Nordstrom, service extends beyond that. Refunding the money for the tire chains. Even with 5 forms of identification and original receipt, it's difficult to get an exchange at most stores. But here we're refunding money for a purchase that the customer didn't even make with us, and we know it. If you want your employees to act differently, the challenge is to tell stories. You want to find your flight simulators. All right, we've talked about 6 different principles of making your messages stick. And none of these are hard to do. And so it's a little embarrassing, you know, I'm standing here as a representative of Stanford University talking about research, and the best I can come up with is tell a story, you know. That seems like a weak message. But it turns out in doing the research for this book that there's a paradox in there that this isn't rocket science, it's not hard to do, but why don't we see more sticky ideas? Why don't we see more brilliantly designed ideas that just sear themselves into our mind, that change our actions on the front line, that change our customers' decision when they make it? And the answer is that there is a problem, and psychologists and behavioral economists who've studied it call this problem the curse of knowledge. And what the research says is that as we become more and more expert in our domain, one of the things that happens is it becomes harder and harder for us to picture what it's like not to have the expertise that we have. You all have years of experience in the hospitality industry. You have years of experience at running a great hotel, right? But as an expert, it's going to become harder and harder for you to have a conversation with somebody that doesn't know what you know. If you've ever had a conversation with an IT person about what's wrong with your computer, you've had that conversation, all right? You've been on the other side of the curse of knowledge. Right? That IT person knows what is happening. They have the expertise to solve your problems, but they're talking in such an abstract, convoluted way that you're not quite getting it. If you've ever had a conversation with a doctor or a lawyer about anything, you've been on the other side of the curse of knowledge. But let me tell you, it's not just fancy people with fancy titles that have the curse of knowledge. Pick an 11-year-old boy and ask him to describe his favorite video game to you. And you will be on the other side of the curse of knowledge. Right? That 11-year-old cannot fathom the depths of your ignorance about that video game. And all of us are like that 11-year-old kid. All of us are like the doctor or the lawyer in our domain of expertise. And systematically that hurts us in getting our messages across, because experts love complexity and nuance. Experts are trying to say 10 things like the lawyer, right? Experts give instruction manuals and workshop orientations that are saying the dozen things that are really important about operating in our organization. But what everyone else needs is a simple message, a high concept pitch to help them make the right decisions. Experts think in abstract ways. We use abstract language, idiopathic cardiomyopathy. And when we're talking to other experts, that is really useful. It shortcuts discussions. It allows us to be really precise about our meaning. But the problem is, when our message has to cross a boundary, we better talk in a very concrete way. So when we're talking to the frontline employee that doesn't have the years of experience that we have, let's talk about, you know, giving the customer to go over and have a drink at the reception and bring them their card, other than the abstraction of being gracious. Talk to them about playing your mom at Thanksgiving dinner instead of just saying, be intuitive, right? And finally, experts love requirements, experts love job descriptions, experts love long lists. But what everyone else needs to see is that what service means in our organization is this story. Let me tell you a story. And you notice how people's ears perk up and their interest rivets when you start telling a story. That's your challenge as a general manager. So let's all admit that communication is hard. It is not natural to make ideas stick. It is not easy. We know it in our personal lives, with our spouses, with our kids, but even more importantly in our business, with the dozens of people that you contact on a daily basis. Making a message stick is not easy. But you can beat the curse of knowledge. And there's a very simple recipe for that. That's to think about the principles of success. I think the John F. Kennedy story is a little bit misleading. And I love it so much because I grew up with the space program, and that was such a meaningful mental picture of that idea of putting the man on the moon. But you could easily be misled in that story by thinking, well, John F. Kennedy, he got his messages across. He was a good-looking guy. He was president of the United States. He dressed well. He looked good. His family looked good, right? And if it takes John F. Kennedy level charisma to get an idea across, then most of us are sunk because we're not there yet. But what I know about that idea is that that was a sticky idea because I never heard John F. Kennedy talk about it. I heard my dad talking to the accountant who lived down the street about putting a man on the moon. And as a kid growing up, I was riveted by that story. And I love my dad. And I like the accountant down the street, but neither one of them could have been accused of being charismatic individuals. So charisma, personal charisma, is not the requirement. What is the requirement is to make your ideas sticky. Use the principles of success. Use the notion of simplicity and concreteness and credibility in telling a story, and you're going to take your good ideas, your worthy ideas, your important ideas, and you're going to make them charismatic ideas. Good luck going back to your homes, going back to your workplaces, and make your ideas stick with others. Thank you.